This episode of Future Cities Africa is brought to you in partnership with Digital Council Africa. It seems like the term smart city has been taken out of context over the years. I'd love to know, what is your definition of a smart or smarter city in the African and South African context?
So I'll make a distinction between a traditional city and a smart city. So a traditional city, it's a city that will operate 9 to 4, if you're lucky, and people are not living at 3. A city that runs in a very analog way, so paper-based systems and lengthy approval processes. Contrasting that to what a smart city should be, really, it's a city that must interface better with citizens at any time of the day, in different channels that citizens want to access government, opposed to running into customer care centers and all of that. So those who want to interface with you through their cell phones, they must be able to do so. But it also must be a city that is built for the future, because with the 4IR and all of that, the cities will compete in the future on things like technology base. The ability to attract investment will largely be on how a city accommodates things such as 5G networks, 5G infrastructure, and so on. So it is largely the ability to transact with customers and interact with customers in various means, but also just the ability to build a city that will survive in the future. So that will be my definition of a smart city, contrasting that with the traditional way that cities were run.
My preference is not to use the phrase smart city, and it's merely because it means different things in different contexts. It could mean to a vendor selling some kind of citywide application. It could mean an interpretation of some, technologically driven, advanced city administration or system. I prefer to speak about smarter cities, and I prefer to do it in the context, yes, of technology and understanding the potential of what technology means to us in being more effective at urban governance, as well as more dynamic economic and social spaces and places. And for me, that linkage in the position that I hold in the city is really about trying to make sure that the systems we use to manage the city effectively link in with other technology platforms that are emerging as effective means to run cities and to improve the experience of cities. But the additional component of being a smarter city is also understanding what it means to live in that time of technological change, with those different systems integrating, and to have some level of transparency for how those systems work, that they are not just closed box systems that are determining people's lives, but actually there is some sense of public buy-in and engagement that makes the smarter city relationship richer. And that speaks very much to the way we started this conversation about open data and being more transparent about how we use data that comes out of technology platforms and how we apply it. A smarter city needs to have the citizen and the resident at the heart of that proposition. Otherwise, it is not being smart with its greatest asset, which is its people. And ultimately, if I think broadly about what makes a city smarter, it is its people. And I'm thinking there about, the work of Professor Ed Glaeser of Harvard University, who speaks about the fact that what makes cities humanity's greatest invention, as it were, is that it is about bringing together people that can unlock economic and social potential in direct and indirect ways. And so I think if you are guided by the fact that really what you are trying to do in becoming smarter is not reifying a technology or a particular approach, but rather is how do you unlock the economic and social potential of individuals who live in a particular densified place and space, and what are the tools and enablers that we use to do that? And that's at the heart of Cape Town's journey to become a smarter city.
You're right. I mean, I often find that when we talk about smart cities, it just gets associated with technology, sensors, and data, and that kind of stuff. My view is I would consider a city smart is when these investments in not just technology, but in social and human capital are done in an efficient manner and a synergistic manner. And then, so firstly, we invest in the capacity and capability, social, technology, and human. And at the same time, we create an environment that's supported by policy, that's supported by governance, and that's supported by collaboration. And this enables then the city to deliver, and especially in the African context, to deliver on the sustainable development goals and sustainable development goals in a sustainable manner. That's how I would view a smart city. It's not just about technology.
Usually the definition of a smart city is when you start using big data to make mass decisions for people. Now that is smart in the sense that artificial intelligence or algorithms is smart, but it's not necessarily intelligent. So I prefer to talk about intelligent cities, which is where you start using technology to enhance the human experience rather than just to make governance more efficient. Because I don't know about you, if you start to look around at the sort of governments and governance that we have in the world at the moment, the last thing you want is to be automating inefficiencies or unfairness, which unfortunately seems to be the way that smart cities, as we've been given them today, seems to be headed. I mean, if you want an example, look at what happened in the UK now with the algorithms that were determining which universities, which students are going to get into, with some rather devastating consequences for the individual.
The definition of a smart city is very convoluted, and there's many explanations, and none of them really hit the nail on the head, apart from helping whoever's written that agenda. But to me, it's essentially you're taking data or information and you're processing it to get a wider, better view of how the city is running. So to me, it's taking a lot of data which is normally held in different silos, and you can't actually look at all the data together, combining it all and be able to analyze and search that and make far better strategic and immediate decisions and move forward, also making better use of your assets. When you look at your typical smart city, you look at places like London, Bristol, New York, Shenzhen, Singapore, but they have a strong infrastructure. They've got reliable electricity, they've got reliable water, sewage, they've got good housing, they've got high education. So it's almost like providing almost your luxury on top of it and making a more comfortable lifestyle. In the South African content, and I got to understand this a lot more with some work I did with Mauritius, is without having stable, reliable electricity all the time, it's not really possible to have a smart city, because you're not actually collecting the data, but the businesses won't want to move in there because if they can't run, they can't use their data, they can't store, or they can't provide services to the rest of the world, then that's not viable. So I think when we're looking at Africa as a whole, we have to look at the foundational elements to enable the digital transformation of the workforce so they can actually provide global services. So we're looking at basic services really, and using that intelligence to help it.
So yeah, so this is often where my talk gets, for some people, a bit controversial. So when many people ask, and I'm often asked to speak about smart cities, they often have this sort of, the high shiny buildings, the, Internet of Things, sensors everywhere, robots doing the work, all sorts, really a tech vision overlaid on a glossy city is often what people mean. Maybe some ideas about what the green city might look like. So again, all sorts of tech around water, energy, smart buildings. And I know, and I'm very interested in all of that, but it's not what I speak about at all. And it's not what really interests me in terms of the smart city from an African perspective. And the reason is this: I think those are constituent elements, and we should use all of the tech we can use and we need to use. So tech comes into it. I would agree, and in fact, we've just completed some work with SAC, and there's a discussion paper we've put together about an interpretation of smart cities that sort of says that, look, doing things intelligently, and in the modern age, that means using data better and using tech to the extent that we can, is absolutely a constituent part of it. But for me, what is smart is, what's the vision, contextualized vision, of the city that you're in, and how are you going about that? And those are questions about imagination, those are questions about governance, those are questions about the kinds of systems and processes you put in place. Those aren't first questions about tech. Those are maybe in number 4, number 5, we get to the tech, because tech can also enable systems, tech can also enable governance, tech can also enable all of that. But you'll hear that I'm consistently using the word enable. So even though I come from a tech background, I'm involved in a civic tech network, so tech is very much a language I appreciate and speak. I do think that the idea of the smart city is foolhardy if it is led only by an idea that tech is going to change everything and save everything. I think tech could destroy us. I don't think it can save us. So my idea for the smart city is definitely, first of all, led by a vision, a contextualized vision for who the city is and how the city is growing, what the city is trying to be. Excuse my hadi-das as I speak. But it's really led by that, and I think it's nurtured by ideas of agility, because that's what we need. We're in a context of change. I've often said that, we're in this time of pandemic, and to me, that's not the big shift. That's one of many small shifts we're experiencing all the time. The smart city in an unequal place like Johannesburg has to be about inequality. So what's a smart unequal city, and what is it trying to be? A smart city has to be about our institutions. We were just talking now about stakeholders. If we've got a public sector and private sector at a local level that can't speak to each other, that doesn't sound very smart. What are we doing about that? If we've got departments that don't speak to each other, we've got a transport department doing one thing, and an energy entity doing something else, and a planning department arguing for something else, that doesn't sound very smart. Now, all of these things could be facilitated through tech, but I think just slapping tech onto it and deciding that that's the savior, that's the smart city, I don't think makes sense. And I often refer to examples around the world of where I see the idea of smart being taken up in much more interesting ways. So I like Barcelona. I like Barcelona because for them, smart city was not always just the highest tech. It was also some very low-tech solutions that addressed what were real issues there. And I like Barcelona as a city as well, because I see it as, and if you've been there, it's very human scale. It's not sort of the big, overwhelming city like many cities aspire to be. And I think they've, in a way, gone the same approach with the tech, where the tech, in my view, is a little bit more human scale. It's a bit more responsive to what are the actual issues we're having, not just trying to say that, well, because elsewhere smart cities have big shiny buildings or have some fancy rail system, that's what we need to have to be smart. So it's not competing on a tech checklist. It's not seeing whether we've done the most, the list AI, blockchain, IoT, we can have that checklist. That's not what it's about, not for me.
It's a very good question. Now, smart city is not a single definition. It doesn't apply equitably across even just different cities within a single country. It has to be very much approached as a design process based on its context of application. So if we think about an African context, there are tremendous differences between one side of a country to the other, between different parts of even one city. And really the only way to deal with that most appropriately in an African context is, above all others, is to take a human-centric approach. We have to understand what it is that we're trying to deliver on the ground as a service to our people, as a way to engage our citizens, and as a way to get the economy thriving on the back of a city that is actually supporting infrastructure. So a smart city is not about the technology you provide. It's not about fiber networks being laid and cables being placed everywhere we go. It's about processes, and it's about strategic frameworks. It's about a design initiative. And then it's about creating key interventions based on the infrastructure you have at hand in order to generate the maximum amount of benefit. So if someone says to me, if I want to create a new smart city in Johannesburg, I would say start with the infrastructure we have and create the best use cases that we can from that, leveraging the data to its maximum degree possible. And do so in a way that allows for future scalability. Now, when I say scalability, what I mean is the ability of a solution to actually become upgraded over time with minimum effort. Then that can only happen with a top-down design approach. What are we trying to achieve? Who are we trying to benefit? What are the existing constraints and opportunities? And then you design the technology stack and support, not the other way around. And I think that's a general misconception in the market, is that a smart city starts with the technology and then we go from there. That's a backwards approach. And that's how money gets unfortunately wasted and how projects are unfortunately made unsuccessful. So there are also some important considerations to be taken in Africa context around socioeconomic development and culture. It's not a one-size-fits-all. So if I were to talk about what makes a smart city in Africa work, it's about creating an engagement platform. And a platform is basically a digital environment that allows for the introduction of data from a variety of omni-channel sources, we call it, from a variety of points of view and sources, including our people on the ground, as well as IoT, as well as news, as well as social media, whatever we can get our hands on, and then disseminating that information back into services. That central point of visibility is absolutely critical. So if we're not thinking or taking a long-term view about what does it mean in terms of 5 years, 10 years, and a 15-year journey, and taking into consideration the fact that our biggest and the most important generator information is the people on the ground, then I don't think a smart city concept in Africa is well-founded. Then, of course, the technology stack is developed and supported.
The commonly held view is that a smart city is a tech city. And I think we're still grappling with what that actually means. And there's no doubt that with the access to technology and more apps that are available, that tech will play a bigger role. But for me, the smart city is more about the connected city, the inclusive city, the accessible city, the one with good public transport, the one with good green space. And when we say good green space, I say, a clean, safe green space, access, pedestrian friendly, cycle friendly. So I think that for me is more of the connected city. And from an inclusivity point of view, obviously the city that doesn't have urban sprawl, that connects people easier, that brings closer the divide between the rich and the poor, and therefore, that everybody has access to all the facilities. And again, I'll come back to the issue of local. And I think maybe we should be revisiting the old idea of the community center, and the access to community health and community policing and community sports facilities. That all our community sports facilities in Johannesburg are kind of falling apart. In fact, the city's trying to get rid of them because they can't manage them. And so maybe there needs to be a new model to have access to these. We did some interesting work 2-3 years ago for the Gauteng Department of Infrastructure Development, exactly around the issue of how do we bring the services to the communities without them having to travel forever, or having to travel to one service one day and another service another day. What happens if we put all of those services in one place? And we create smaller communities that are accessible by bicycle and by local commuter transport, or just within walking distance. If you talk about the good urban design the walkable city. So if all of those facilities in smaller natures, but well looked after and obviously well managed, then one has a better opportunity. So it can be a bigger city, but it's actually broken down into communities or neighborhoods. And even if we look at that from an office design point of view, we also talk about neighborhoods. So we often use urban design references in solving our design challenges for big office blocks, because you also need to break them up into communities. So that's a good, I think, a good strategy. We need to kind of reinvent those. In my youth, we had a good community center with a swimming pool and what have you, and it was safe and it was accessible, and we got on our bicycles and we went there, and the parents were happy that you were doing your own thing. So how do we bring some of that back? I'm interested in solving that challenge, and not just in Parkhurst where I live, but in all the communities.
This is what I always mention. It's not, the technology is just a tool. The citizen should be in the center. So technology is a tool, and many cities, they include citizen in the design before the development of solution. They design their cities.
Using technology to create efficiencies within our cities to achieve their developmental needs. I know there's a lot of people who will say that smart doesn't necessarily mean technology, and I suppose I would believe them, but me personally, I feel smart cities in the way we're talking about now is really about how do we use technology and data and innovation to sort of better improve on cities and people's lives. Really, I think that's the key, is improving citizens' lives within cities.
A smart city is a city that makes a full use of data and technologies for sustainable and inclusive urban development. That's very clear. But it's also, as we understand, the use of technologies and the use of data is not an end in itself. It should serve some other substantive objectives. So I would say that in the Ugandan context, one advantage I believe that Ugandan cities have, and the advantage that is not properly utilized, is its connection to the peri-urban and rural areas at the personal level. Many urbanites in Uganda are first-generation people or second-generation people at best. Practically any Ugandan has a plot of land somewhere in the village, an extended family in the village. Many of them are engaged in some kind of agricultural production. But this is all, as I said, on a personal level. Somehow it does not translate into the planning arrangements, into transport connectivity, into service delivery, and we are risking this growing gap between the urban areas and rural areas in terms of access to services, in terms of development opportunities, and so on and so forth. So the use of that, advantage or translation of that advantage from the personal level into institutional arrangements would be very desirable. The other thing important for a smart city in any context, but in Ugandan context specifically, would be a smart use of financial instruments and financial approaches. We have started talking about it. We have started talking about the example of Johannesburg, but of course some other municipalities, including Pretoria and Cape Town in South Africa, have floated their general obligation bonds. There are also some other very exciting approaches. We are talking about green bonds. We are talking about all kinds of special purpose vehicles and platforms, including diaspora finance, including philanthropic finance, and so on and so forth. The landscape, the financing landscape has significantly diversified in the past 20 years probably. And our understanding in general about how we can use and how we can experiment with different approaches is also better. But very few cities really tap into those additional sources of capital, use those instruments, and this is, I believe, a huge setback for city development.